They say experience is the best teacher. But in the fast-paced world of tech startups, experience is often seen as a burden rather than an asset. I learned this lesson the hard way at Innovate Tech Solutions, a company I helped build from a small coding project into a $100 million enterprise. My name is Michael Anderson, and after 20 years of building secure systems for companies ranging from small businesses to Fortune 500 corporations, I thought I'd seen it all. But nothing prepared me for how quickly success could turn into betrayal, especially when ambition and inexperience collide. The morning everything changed started like any other. I arrived at our sleep downtown office at 6:30 a.m., 2 hours before most of the young innovators would roll in with their cold brew coffees and latest tech gadgets. The early morning hours were my most productive time, when I could review code without interruption and catch potential issues before they became problems. That particular morning, I was reviewing the architecture for our new cloud security platform, a project that had consumed the last 18 months of my life. The system was my brainchild, built on 2 decades of understanding how hackers think, how systems fail, and most importantly, how human error can compromise even the most sophisticated security measures. Early as usual, Mike. I looked up to see Marcus Davidson, our newly appointed technical director, leaning against my office doorframe. At 32, Marcus represented everything the modern tech world worshipped: young, ambitious, and absolutely convinced that newer always meant better. He joined us 8 months ago, brought in by our venture capital investors who wanted fresh perspectives in the leadership team. Just reviewing the security protocols for the cloud platform launch, I replied, turning my monitor slightly so he could see the complex diagrams I'd been analyzing. I found some potential vulnerabilities in the new authentication system. Marcus's perfectly maintained smile tightened slightly. The authentication system that my team designed. Yes, I said, pulling up the relevant code. The biometric verification process has a blind spot. Under certain conditions, it could allow. Mike? Marcus interrupted, his tone shifting to what I'd come to think of as his mentoring voice, despite the fact that I'd been coding before he was in grade school. This is exactly what we need to discuss. Your constant concerns about security vulnerabilities are slowing down our development cycle. I leaned back in my chair, already knowing where this conversation was heading. We'd had variations of it several times over the past few months. Marcus, rushing to launch with security flaws cold. Could what? He cut in. Could make us miss our window. Could let our competitors beat us to market. Because that's exactly what's happening while you obsess over theoretical vulnerabilities. I took a deep breath, reminding myself that Marcus, despite his position, was still learning. These aren't theoretical. Last week alone, 3 major tech companies faced ransomware attacks that could have been prevented with proper. Those companies were dinosaurs, Marcus scoffed. We're different. We're innovative. We're agile. Speaking of which, he straightened up, adjusting his designer glasses. The board would like to see you in the main conference room. Now, something in his tone made me pause. I'd been in tech long enough to recognize when things were about to go sideways. I saved my work, locked my computer, and followed Marcus to the conference room, noting how he seemed to be almost bouncing with barely contained energy. The conference room was already occupied. Eleanor Hayes, our CEO, sat at the head of the table, flanked by 2 men in expensive suits, our lead investors. Sarah from HR sat in a corner, a folder placed neatly in front of her. None of them met my eyes as I entered. Mike, please have a seat, Eleanor said, gesturing to the chair directly across from her. As I sat down, I noticed a document already placed at my spot. The title read Separation Agreement. I'll cut to the chase. Eleanor began, her voice carrying the practiced neutrality of someone delivering bad news they don't personally regret. InnovateTech is moving in a new direction. We need to stay competitive in an increasingly aggressive market, and that means embracing new methodologies, new perspectives, new blood. Marcus added from where he stood by the window, not even trying to hide his satisfaction. I looked down at the separation agreement, then back at Eleanor. The cloud platform isn't ready. The security systems need. The security systems are fine, Marcus interrupted. More than fine. They're revolutionary. What they don't need is constant modification based on outdated threat models. Eleanor held up a hand to silence Marcus, though I noticed she didn't disagree with him. Mike, you've been valuable to InnovateTech. Your experience helped us get where we are. But technology is evolving, and we need to evolve with it. We need to move faster, take bigger risks, make bigger mistakes, I suggested quietly. One of the investors, Thompson, I remembered, cleared his throat. Mr. Anderson, we're prepared to offer a generous separation package. 6 months' salary, health benefits through the end of the year, and a positive reference for future opportunities. Though at your age, Marcus added with a smirk, maybe it's time to consider retirement. Let the next generation take the reins. I looked at each face around the table. Eleanor, carefully maintaining her professional mask. The investors, already checking their phones, considering the matter settled. Sarah from HR, slightly uncomfortable but resigned. And Marcus, practically glowing with triumph. None of them knew. None of them understood what they were about to do. The platform launches in 2 days, I said, keeping my voice level. You might want to reconsider the timing of this. The platform is ready, Marcus declared. My team has run every possible test. The beta results are exceptional. We're pushing it live at the board presentation on Friday. I thought about the security protocols I'd been reviewing that morning, about the backup systems I'd quietly put in place over the years, about all the lessons experience had taught me about how systems fail and how people fail with them. I see, I said, picking up the separation agreement. And you're sure about this decision? Absolutely, Eleanor replied. It's time for InnovateTech to embrace the future. I signed the document without another word. Marcus looked almost disappointed. He'd clearly been expecting an argument, maybe even hoping for one. Instead, I stood up, straightened my jacket, and headed for the door. Security will escort you to clear out your desk, Sarah said softly. Company policy. I nodded, then turned back to face the room one last time. A piece of advice, if I may. Experience isn't just about knowing what works. It's about remembering what failed and why. Good luck with the launch. Marcus snorted. Save the cryptic warnings, Mike. Your 20 years of experience means nothing in today's tech world. We'll show you how real innovation works. I smiled slightly as I left the room, already doing the mental calculations. In exactly 48 hours, during their big board presentation, they would learn exactly why experience matters. Sometimes the most valuable lessons are the ones you learn the hard way. As security watched me pack up my office, I thought about all the outdated security measures I'd implemented over the years. The redundant systems Marcus had called paranoid. The backup protocols he dismissed as unnecessary. The carefully crafted fail-safes that no one had bothered to fully understand. In 2 days, during their moment of triumph, they would discover that in technology, as in life, there's no substitute for experience, and some lessons can only be learned through failure. I walked out of Innovate's glass and steel building for the last time, carrying a box of personal items and 2 decades of knowledge they thought they didn't need. Behind me, Marcus was probably already planning how to take credit for my work, how to present himself as the visionary who would lead the company into the future. But the future has a way of teaching its own lessons, and in 48 hours, Innovatech would learn exactly how much experience matters in the world of technology. Sometimes the best way to prove your value is to let others discover it in your absence. As I loaded my box into my car, I couldn't help but smile. The countdown had begun, and I didn't even need to do anything. The system would do exactly what it was designed to do: protect itself from inexperienced hands trying to modify what they didn't understand. The next 2 days would be very interesting indeed. The next 48 hours passed slowly. I spent them in my home office, surrounded by 20 years of certifications, awards, and memories, waiting for the inevitable. The system I'd built wasn't just code. It was a reflection of every lesson I'd learned, every failure I'd witnessed, and every attack I'd prevented over 2 decades in cybersecurity. Marcus and his team were about to learn those lessons the hard way. I didn't need to hack anything or plant any viruses. I didn't need to sabotage their launch. The innovative changes Marcus had been pushing through would do all the work for me. Sometimes the best revenge is simply letting people face the consequences of their own decisions. The morning of the board presentation, I received a text from Patricia, one of the senior developers who'd worked with me for years. "Mike, something's wrong with the authentication protocols. The test environments are showing unusual patterns." I didn't respond. Patricia was smart. She'd been one of the few who understood why I'd insisted on certain security measures. She figured it out soon enough. Another text came an hour later, this time from David in System Operations. "Marcus is modifying the core security protocols for the demo. Says he's streamlining them. Things are getting weird." I could picture it clearly. Marcus, confident in his innovative approach, making last-minute changes to impress the board, probably removing what he saw as unnecessary security layers, bypassing what he considered outdated protocols. Each change would trigger subtle cascading effects throughout the system, effects that wouldn't become apparent until it was too late. At precisely 2 p.m., I opened my laptop and connected to Innovatech's public dev blog, where they'd be streaming parts of the board presentation. Marcus's face filled the screen, standing proudly at the podium in an expensive suit. "Ladies and gentlemen of the board," he began, practically glowing with confidence, "today marks a new era in cloud security. Our revolutionary platform represents a complete departure from outdated security models." I glanced at the system monitoring dashboard I still had access to, not through any backdoor, but through the legitimate admin credentials they'd forgotten to revoke. The warning signs were already there: unusual traffic patterns, escalating system responses, security protocols activating in sequences Marcus couldn't possibly understand. "Our innovative approach," Marcus continued, "eliminates the bureaucratic layers of traditional security while providing unprecedented protection." A small alert appeared in the corner of my screen. The system had detected unauthorized modifications to core protocols. Just as I designed it to do, it was already beginning its automated response. "Allow me to demonstrate," Marcus said, turning to the large display behind him. "We'll simulate a sophisticated attack on our system." I leaned back in my chair, watching as Marcus began the demonstration. He had no idea that he himself was the sophisticated attack the system had detected. Every streamlined change he'd made, every innovative bypass he'd implemented, had been logged and analyzed by the deep security protocols I'd built into the system's core. The first sign that something was wrong came when Marcus's demo account was suddenly logged out. "A minor glitch," he said, his smile tightening slightly. "Let me just—" His second login attempt triggered the secondary security response. Across the company's network, every modified security protocol began reverting to its original state. Marcus's improvements were being systematically identified and quarantined. "This is unexpected," Marcus stammered, his fingers flying over the keyboard. Just a moment. Warning messages began popping up on the display behind him. Each one detailed the security vulnerability his changes had introduced, complete with timestamps and severity assessments. The system was doing exactly what it was designed to do, protecting itself from threats, even internal ones. Eleanor stepped forward, her professional composure cracking. "Marcus, what's happening?" "Nothing," he snapped, but his voice had risen an octave. "Just some aggressive security protocols. I'll override them." That's when the main security system kicked in. The large screen behind Marcus shifted, displaying a comprehensive security audit. Every change he'd made over the past 2 days was listed, along with detailed analysis of the vulnerabilities each change had introduced. "As you can see," the automated system announced in its calm, clinical voice, "multiple critical security protocols have been compromised, initiating emergency protection measures." One of the board members stood up, pointing at a scrolling list of numbers. "Are those potential financial losses?" They were. I'd programmed the system to calculate the possible cost of each security breach, a feature Marcus had dismissed as fear-mongering. Now those numbers were telling a story that even the most profit-focused board member could understand. "This is impossible," Marcus protested, his composure completely gone. "These security protocols are outdated. They're unnecessary." On the contrary, the system responded, displaying a new set of data. "These protocols have prevented 4,893 attempted breaches in the past year alone. Would you like to see the attack patterns?" Patricia's face appeared in one of the side windows of the video feed. "The system is running a full security audit. Everything Marcus changed is being identified as a potential threat, because it is a threat. These protocols, they're not just security measures. They're learning algorithms." Understanding dawned on Eleanor's face. "Anderson," she whispered. "This is what he was trying to tell us." The board chairman stood up, his expression thunderous. "Turn it off. Turn all of it off right now." "We can't," Patricia replied. "The system is doing exactly what it was designed to do, protect itself from unauthorized modifications. Every improvement Marcus made actually created vulnerabilities. The system is defending itself." "Defending itself," Marcus shouted. "It's just code. I'm the technical director. I have the authority to." "Authority isn't the same as understanding," Patricia cut in. "These security protocols, they're based on years of real-world attack data. Each layer serves a purpose. They're not outdated. They're battle-tested." The system continued its relentless audit, now displaying a simulation of how Marcus's changes would have left the platform vulnerable to various types of attacks. Each scenario played out in precise detail, showing exactly how real hackers could have exploited the streamlined security. "Mr. Davidson," the chairman said slowly, "did you understand what you were modifying?" Marcus's silence was answer enough. "The potential losses," another board member spoke up. "These numbers. If we had launched with these vulnerabilities, We'd have been liable for every breach. Eleanor finished, her face ashen. Every data leak, every exploit. The system chose that moment to display its final analysis, a comprehensive report showing how the original security architecture had evolved over years of real-world testing, learning from each attempted attack, adapting to new threats while maintaining core protections. "This isn't just code," Patricia said quietly. "This is 20 years of experience encoded into our systems, and we just fired the person who understood it best." My phone buzzed. A message from Eleanor. "We need to talk." I smiled, but didn't respond immediately. Let them sweat a little. Let them fully appreciate the difference between true innovation and reckless change. The board meeting devolved into chaos. Marcus was trying to defend his decisions, but the system kept displaying evidence of how each innovation had compromised crucial security measures. The board members were on their phones, presumably calling their lawyers. Eleanor looked like she had aged 10 years in 10 minutes. Finally, I typed out a response to Eleanor. "The system is working exactly as designed. It protects itself from threats, including well-meaning but inexperienced modifications. When you're ready to discuss real innovation, you know where to find me." Over the next few hours, my phone lit up with messages. From board members, from Eleanor, from various team leads suddenly realizing how much institutional knowledge they'd lost. Even Marcus tried to reach out, his message a mixture of anger and desperate pleading. I responded to none of them. 3 days later, I sat across from Eleanor and the board chairman in a small cafe far from the Innovatech offices. The headlines were still rolling in. Tech startups launched derailed by own security system. The true cost of experience. Innovatech's $100 million lesson. "We were wrong," Eleanor said simply. "We confused innovation with recklessness." The chairman nodded. "We'd like you to come back. Full technical control, board seat, significant equity stake. And Mr. Davidson has been asked to pursue other opportunities," Eleanor finished. I took a sip of my coffee, considering their offer. "The system needs work," I said finally. Marcus's changes, while misguided, highlighted areas where we could improve. Not by removing security, but by making it more adaptable. "You have something in mind?" the chairman asked. I pulled out my laptop, opening a proposal I'd been working on. Innovation isn't about ignoring experience. It's about building on it. Here's how we can make the system better while keeping it secure. They listened intently as I outlined my plans. "Real innovation," I explained, "comes from understanding both the past and the future. From knowing why things work, not just how to change them." 6 months later, I stood in front of the board again, but this time as Chief Security Officer and board member. Our platform had launched successfully, incorporating both robust security and genuine innovation. Marcus's replacement, a talented developer who understood the value of experience, had helped me implement improvements that made the system even stronger. The lesson wasn't lost on anyone. In the fast-paced world of technology, it's easy to dismiss experience as outdated knowledge. But true innovation isn't about discarding the past. It's about understanding it deeply enough to build a better future. Sometimes the most valuable feature of any system isn't its cutting-edge technology or its innovative design. Sometimes it's the quiet wisdom built into its foundations, the lessons learned from years of experience, patiently waiting to prove their worth. As for Marcus, last I heard, he was working at a small startup under the supervision of a senior developer who insisted on teaching him the fundamentals of security before letting him touch any production code. Experience, as they say, is the best teacher. And sometimes the most expensive lessons are the ones you learn by ignoring it. Every morning when I arrive at the office at 6:30 a.m., I smile at the plaque now hanging in the lobby. Innovation respects experience. It's a reminder to everyone that in technology, as in life, the best way forward isn't about choosing between innovation and experience. It's about bringing them together to build something truly revolutionary. The young developers who once rolled their eyes at my outdated concerns now seek out my advice, eager to understand the why behind the how. And when they come up with new ideas, we work together to implement them in ways that respect both innovation and security. That's the real lesson in all of this. True innovation doesn't mean forgetting the past. It means understanding it well enough to build a better future. Sometimes it takes a crisis to remind us of that truth, but once learned, it's a lesson that proves its value every single day.
The first time I suspected something was wrong at Metropolitan General Hospital was during the routine safety audit in the surgical wing. As chief of patient safety, I developed a habit of doing these walkthroughs personally, not trusting the sanitized reports that crossed my desk. Dr. Mitchell, a nurse, called out, hurrying to catch up with me. "There's something you should see in OR3. I'm Dr. Sarah Mitchell, and for the past 8 years, I've dedicated my life to keeping patients safe at one of Boston's largest hospitals. My colleagues often joke that I can spot a safety violation from across the building. They're not entirely wrong. After 15 years in hospital administration and a PhD in healthcare quality and patient safety, certain things just jump out at you. The issue in OR3 turned out to be a malfunctioning air handling system, something that should have been flagged weeks ago in the maintenance reports. But like many other problems I've been finding lately, it had somehow slipped through the cracks. How long has this been going on? I asked the nurse, already pulling out my tablet to document the violation. At least 3 weeks, she said quietly, glancing over her shoulder. We've reported it multiple times, but nothing had been done. It was becoming a familiar pattern, one that had started shortly after Richard Harrison took over as hospital director 6 months ago. I'd noticed the changes immediately, subtle at first, then increasingly obvious. Maintenance requests delayed, safety protocols streamlined, staff training sessions shortened, all in the name of efficiency and cost-cutting. "I'll take care of it," I assured the nurse, adding the violation to my growing list. "And thank you for bringing it to my attention." Back in my office, I pulled up the maintenance records. The air handling system issue had indeed been reported multiple times, but each report had been marked as non-critical and pushed back in the queue. It was the same story with dozens of other safety issues I'd documented over the past few months. A knock at my door interrupted my review. Dr. Jessica Torres, head of surgery, stood in the doorway, her expression grim. "Sarah, we need to talk about what happened in OR7 yesterday." My stomach tightened. I'd been waiting for this conversation since receiving the incident report this morning. A patient had developed a post-operative infection, the third such case in 2 months. The new sterilization protocols? I asked if I already knew the answer. Jessica nodded, closing the door behind her. "They're not working, Sarah. The shortened cycle times, the reduced chemical concentrations. We're seeing contamination rates we haven't had in years." I know. I pulled up the statistics on my computer, showing her the trend lines I've been tracking. Infection rates are up 47% since the new protocols were implemented. I submitted 3 reports to Harrison about it. "Let me guess. He said it was within acceptable parameters?" I smiled grimly. His exact words were well within industry standards. But he's using outdated benchmarks. The current safety standards are much stricter. What are we going to do about it? I'm preparing a comprehensive report for the next board meeting. Every incident, every violation, every cost-cutting measure that's compromised patient safety. It'll be hard to ignore the numbers. Jessica leaned forward, lowering her voice. "Be careful, Sarah." Harrison has the board wrapped around his finger. All they see are the cost savings and efficiency metrics. She wasn't wrong. Since taking over, Harrison had cut operating costs by 15%, a feat that had earned him glowing praise from the hospital board. What they didn't see were the corners being cut to achieve those savings. After Jessica left, I spent hours compiling data for my report. The patterns were clear and disturbing. Increased infection rates, longer recovery times, more post-operative complications, all coinciding with Harrison's efficiency improvements. But I needed more than just statistics. I needed concrete evidence that would force the board to act. Over the next week, I dug deeper into the hospital's records. What I found was worse than I'd imagined. Harrison wasn't just cutting corners, he was systematically dismantling safety protocols that had taken years to build. The sterilization issues were just the tip of the iceberg. Maintenance schedules had been stretched dangerously thin. Staff training hours had been slashed. Quality control checks had been reduced to the bare minimum required by law, and sometimes not even that. I documented everything meticulously, building a case that no one could ignore. But Harrison wasn't stupid. He must have noticed my investigations, my detailed questions, my careful documentation of every violation. The confrontation came sooner than I expected. It was late evening, and I was reviewing staff rotation schedules when Harrison burst into my office, his face flushed with anger. "What the hell is this?" He slammed a document onto my desk, a copy of the preliminary report I'd been preparing for the board. "That," I said calmly, "is a comprehensive analysis of patient safety metrics since your new protocols were implemented. This is garbage," he spat. "Cherry-picked data designed to undermine my authority. Do you have any idea how hard I've worked to make this hospital efficient?" "Efficient at what cost?" I stood up, meeting his glare. "The infection rates in OR7 alone are well within acceptable parameters." He cut me off. "You and your obsession with gold standard protocols are costing this hospital millions. Do you know how much money we've saved with the new sterilization procedures? Do you know how many patients have developed infections because of those procedures?" His face darkened. "Watch yourself, Dr. Mitchell. Your position here isn't as secure as you think." "Is that a threat?" "It's a reality check. The board meeting is in 2 days. If you present this report, if you try to undermine everything we've accomplished." "Everything you've accomplished," I corrected him. "And what exactly is that?" "Cutting costs by compromising patient safety, trading people's lives for profit margins." Harrison's smile was cold. "You really don't get it, do you? This is a business, Sarah. A business that was hemorrhaging money before I took over. Sometimes difficult decisions have to be made. Not with people's lives." He straightened, adjusting his tie. "I'm giving you a chance here. Withdraw the report. Get on board with the program. Otherwise..." "Otherwise what?" "You'll fire me for doing my job. For protecting patients. For being unable to adapt to necessary changes. For refusing to embrace modern healthcare management practices. For being, quite frankly, obsolete." I looked at him for a long moment, seeing him clearly for the first time. He wasn't evil. Not really. He was just a man who had lost sight of what healthcare was supposed to be about. "The report stays," I said quietly. "The board needs to know the truth." "Then you leave me no choice." He pulled an envelope from his jacket and dropped it on my desk. "Your services are no longer required at Metropolitan General." I opened the envelope. Termination papers, effective immediately. The reasons listed were vague enough to sound plausible. Failure to adapt to organizational changes, resistance to efficiency improvements, insubordination. "Your XCESSIV safety payroll to your COLs are costing US money," he shouted, his composure finally cracking. "We can't afford your outdated idealism anymore." I looked at the papers, then back at him, feeling strangely calm. "You know what we really can't afford, Richard? The lawsuits that will come when people start dying from preventable infections. The investigations that will follow when someone finally looks closely at what you've been doing." "Get out," he snarled. "Security will escort you to clear your office." I stood slowly, gathering my personal tablet, my own device, not the hospital-issued one. "Of course. But Richard, you might want to postpone that board meeting tomorrow." "Why's that?" I smiled, thinking of the detailed records I'd been compiling, the evidence I gathered, the witnesses I prepared. "Because the medical board will be very interested in what I have to show them." His face paled slightly. "You wouldn't dare." "Watch me." I walked to the door, then turned back. "You know what the funny thing is? All those safety protocols you called excessive, they weren't just protecting patients. They were protecting you too. As security escorted me out of the building, I could feel Harrison watching from his office window. He thought he'd won, thought he'd silenced another troublesome idealist who didn't understand the realities of modern healthcare. But he'd forgotten something crucial about patient safety professionals. We document everything. And tomorrow, those documents would tell a story that not even the hospital board could ignore. In my car, I pulled out my phone and made 3 calls. The first was to my lawyer, confirming our meeting first thing in the morning. The second was to Dr. Torres, who had been quietly gathering her own evidence from the surgical department. The third call was to my old colleague at the state medical board, the one who had been waiting for months for concrete evidence of safety violations at Metropolitan General. "It's time," I told her. "I have everything you need. Tomorrow would be interesting indeed." Harrison thought you fired another naive idealist who cared too much about safety protocols. Instead, he just armed the one person who could expose everything he'd been trying to hide. Sometimes being too careful is exactly what the situation requires. The night after my termination, I sat in my home office surrounded by 8 years' worth of meticulously maintained records. My laptop displayed a secure cloud drive containing thousands of documents, incident reports, safety violations, maintenance logs, and staff complaints. Harrison had no idea that I'd been building this archive since the day he started changing protocols. My phone buzzed. A message from Dr. Torres. 3 more post-op infections reported today. Harrison's trying to classify them as unrelated incidents. I added this information to my growing file, remembering the conversation I'd had with Jessica Torres 4 months ago, when we first noticed the spike in infection rates. "Document everything," I told her then. "Every infection, every complication, every deviation from standard protocols. And make copies. Lots of copies." She had done exactly that, as had dozens of other healthcare professionals throughout Metropolitan General. They'd seen what was happening under Harrison's leadership, and they trusted me enough to share their concerns and their evidence. At 7 a.m., I met with my lawyer, David Cohen, in his downtown Boston office. He'd already reviewed most of my documentation, but the new files from the past week made him raise his eyebrows. "This is more serious than we thought," he said, studying the infection rate charts. "These numbers, if these had been reported properly to the medical board." "They were reported," I corrected him. "Harrison just found ways to classify them differently. Split them into separate categories, spread them across departments so the pattern wouldn't be obvious." David nodded, making notes. "Deliberate misclassification of adverse events. That's a serious violation of reporting requirements." He looked up at me. "You know they'll try to discredit you, paint you as a disgruntled former employee." I smiled, pulling out another file. "That's why I have this. Every email, every memo where I raised concerns about the safety protocols. Every response where Harrison dismissed those concerns. And most importantly, I handed him a USB drive, recorded conversations from staff meetings where he explicitly ordered supervisors to implement these dangerous policies." "You recorded the meetings?" "Massachusetts is a one-party consent state," I reminded him. "And as chief of patient safety, documenting safety-related discussions was part of my job description." David let out a low whistle. "Harrison really didn't know who he was dealing with, did he?" "No, he didn't. He'd seen me as another bureaucratic obstacle, someone too focused on rules and regulations to understand the bigger picture of hospital management. What he hadn't realized was that patient safety professionals are trained to see the biggest picture of all, the human cost of cutting corners." At 9 a.m., I met with Dr. Catherine Sullivan from the State Medical Board. I'd known Catherine for 15 years, since our residency days. She'd gone into medical regulation while I focused on hospital safety, but we'd stayed in touch, sharing concerns about the increasing pressure on hospitals to prioritize profits over patient care. "My God, Sarah," she said, paging through my reports. "The sterilization protocols alone. How did he think he could get away with this?" "Because he almost did," I admitted. "He was smart about it, never making changes that would obviously violate regulations, just small adjustments, each one seemingly insignificant on its own. But in combination, they created a perfect storm. Reduced sterilization times, diluted cleaning solutions, shortened inspection protocols, all while maintaining just enough documentation to seem compliant." Catherine's face hardened as she read the infection statistics. 3 deaths from post-operative infections in the past month alone. And these were classified as complications due to pre-existing conditions. I quoted bitterly. Harrison found a way to blame every incident on something other than his cost-cutting measures. She set down the reports and looked at me seriously. You know what will happen when we open a formal investigation? The hospital's reputation will suffer, I finished. I know. I've worked there for 8 years, Catherine. I care about Metropolitan General, but I care more about the patients who trust us with their lives. She nodded slowly. The medical board meets at 2 p.m. I want you there to present this evidence personally. As I left her office, my phone buzzed again. A message from Tom Parker, head of hospital maintenance. Harrison's in the maintenance office, ordering us to update the service logs. What do you need me to do? I smiled grimly. Even now, Harrison was trying to cover his tracks. Don't interfere, I texted back. But document everything he changes. Take pictures of the original logs first. The next few hours were a blur of preparation. I met with Dr. Torres and other department heads who had agreed to testify about the safety violations. Each brought their own documentation, their own stories of how Harrison's policies had endangered patients. Maria Gonzalez, head surgical nurse, had kept a personal log of every infection that could be traced to the new sterilization protocols. Dr. James Wu from emergency medicine had documented how reduced maintenance on critical equipment had led to failures during crucial procedures. At 1:30 p.m., we gathered in the medical board's waiting room. Harrison wasn't there yet. He probably thought he had at least another day before I could organize any kind of response to my termination. Dr. Mitchell, a board assistant, appeared. We're ready for you. I stood gathering my materials. Dr. Torres squeezed my arm supportively. Given health, Sarah. Inside the boardroom, Catherine was already seated with the other board members. Their faces were serious as I began setting up my presentation. At 1:45, the door burst open. Harrison strode in, his face flushed. What is the meaning of this? I wasn't notified of any board hearing. Mr. Harrison, Catherine said coolly, how fortunate you could join us. We were just about to review some concerning evidence about safety protocols at Metropolitan General. He turned to me, his expression murderous. You had no right. Actually, I interrupted calmly. As Chief of Patient Safety, I had every right and responsibility to report safety violations to the proper authorities. Your termination of my employment doesn't change that obligation. These are internal hospital matters. 3 deaths from preventable infections in the past month alone. I cut in. Are those internal matters too? The board chairman leaned forward. Mr. Harrison, please take a seat. Dr. Mitchell has brought some very serious allegations to our attention. Harrison sat, his face tight with controlled rage. I could almost see him calculating, planning how to discredit me, how to explain away the evidence. But as my presentation began, as I methodically laid out the documentation of every violation, every covered-up incident, every dangerous policy change, I watched his confidence begin to crumble. The infection rate charts were damning enough. But when I played the recorded meetings where he explicitly ordered staff to implement dangerous protocols, when I showed the maintenance logs documenting systematic neglect of critical equipment, when I presented testimony from department heads about specific incidents that have been covered up. This is a coordinated attack, Harrison tried to interrupt. Disgruntled employees trying to. These are sworn statements, Catherine cut him off, from every department head at Metropolitan General. Are you suggesting they're all lying? I continued my presentation, showing how Harrison had manipulated reporting categories to hide adverse events, how he pressured staff to minimize safety concerns, how he created a culture of fear that discouraged incident reporting. The final blow came when I presented the financial data, proving that the cost savings Harrison had achieved came directly from compromising safety measures. The choice, I concluded, was between patient safety and profit margins. Mr. Harrison made his choice clear. Now you have to make yours. The room was silent as I finished. Harrison sat frozen, his career crumbling before his eyes. The board members exchanged glances, their expressions grave. Catherine spoke first. Mr. Harrison, do you have any response to these allegations? He straightened his tie, attempting to recover his composure. These protocols were all within acceptable parameters. According to whose standards? I interrupted, pulling up another document, because according to current medical board regulations, which I've highlighted here, virtually every protocol change you implemented violated safety requirements. The hospital was losing money, and now it may lose its accreditation, the board chairman said quietly. These violations, the scope of them. Harrison's face went pale. Loss of accreditation would be a death sentence for Metropolitan General. Unless, I said carefully, immediate corrective action is taken. I've prepared a comprehensive plan to restore proper safety protocols along with a monitoring system to ensure compliance. The board members looked at me with interest. Harrison looked like he'd swallowed something bitter. You planned this, he said softly. All of it. No, Richard. I corrected him. You planned this the moment you decided that profit margins were more important than patient lives. I just documented it. The next 2 hours were intense. The board reviewed every piece of evidence, questioned every witness, examined every document. Harrison's attempts to defend his actions grew increasingly desperate as the weight of evidence mounted. By 5 p.m., the board had reached its decision. Harrison was suspended pending a full investigation. Metropolitan General would be placed under direct board supervision until proper safety protocols were restored, and I was asked to oversee that restoration. As we left the boardroom, Harrison stopped me. You've destroyed everything I built, he said, his voice shaking with rage. No, I replied quietly. I protected what generations of healthcare professionals built. A system where patient safety comes first. You tried to destroy that. I just wouldn't let you. Walking out of the building, I checked my phone. Messages were pouring in from hospital staff who had heard about the board's decision. Relief, gratitude, and hope filled their words. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, rebuilding trust, restoring protocols, repairing the damage Harrison had done. But for now, I felt a deep satisfaction. Sometimes being too careful means being exactly careful enough. The morning after the medical board hearing, I walked back into Metropolitan General not as a disgraced former employee, but as the board-appointed safety compliance director. The irony wasn't lost on anyone, especially not on the hospital board members who had supported Harrison's efficiency measures. Dr. Mitchell, board chairman William Douglas greeted me stiffly in the main conference room. We've reviewed the medical board's requirements for reinstatement of full accreditation. And I kept my voice neutral, though I could see from their faces that the reality of the situation had finally sunk in. The costs of implementing these safety protocols, he began, are significantly less than the cost of losing accreditation. I finished, or the lawsuits that would follow if the public learned about the compromised safety standards. The room fell silent. These were business people used to thinking in terms of profits and losses. Now they were facing a different kind of mathematics, one where human lives figured into the equation. What do you need from us? Douglas asked finally. Complete autonomy to implement necessary changes, no interference from the board on safety protocols, and a public commitment to maintaining these standards regardless of cost. That's a lot to ask. No, I corrected him. That's the bare minimum required by law. What Harrison did, what you allowed him to do, wasn't just unethical. It was criminal. Douglas flinched at the word criminal, but nodded slowly. You have our full support. The work began immediately. My first step was assembling a team of department heads who had helped expose Harrison's violations. Dr. Torres from surgery, Dr. Wu from emergency medicine, Maria Gonzalez from nursing, people who had risked their careers to document the truth. First priority, I announced in our initial meeting, is addressing the immediate safety risks. The compromised sterilization protocols, the maintenance backlogs, the staffing shortages in critical areas. Harrison's people are still in key positions, Dr. Wu pointed out. They won't make this easy. He was right. Despite Harrison's suspension, many of his loyal administrators remained, embedded throughout the hospital's bureaucracy. They had careers and reputations invested in maintaining the fiction that his policies had been legitimate. But I had something they didn't: proof. Over the next week, we methodically addressed each safety violation documented in my reports. The sterilization protocols were immediately restored to proper standards. Critical equipment maintenance was expedited. Staffing levels were increased to ensure proper safety monitoring. The costs mounted quickly, causing the board members to shift uncomfortably in their seats during daily briefings. But with the medical board's investigators now regularly present in the hospital, they couldn't object. The resistance from Harrison's remaining allies was subtle but persistent. Maintenance requests were lost. Schedule changes were misunderstood. Documentation was accidentally misfiled. Then came the first test of our restored protocols. Dr. Mitchell. Maria Gonzalez caught me as I was leaving a department meeting. We've got a situation in War 4. The new safety protocols just prevented a major incident. I followed her to the surgical wing, where Dr. Torres was waiting with a grim expression. The equipment check you reinstated, she explained. It caught a critical fault in the anesthesia delivery system. Under Harrison's protocols, we wouldn't have found it until... She didn't need to finish. We all knew what could have happened. Document everything, I instructed. Every detail, every person involved, every potential consequence that was avoided. The incident became our first success story. Concrete proof that the restored safety measures were saving lives. I made sure the report reached every board member and department head. But our opponents weren't finished. 2 days later, an anonymous letter circulated through the hospital, detailing the excessive costs of the new safety protocols and warning of potential layoffs and department closures. I called an all-staff meeting. Let's talk about costs. I began projecting financial data onto the screen. Specifically, the cost of a single wrongful death lawsuit, the cost of lost accreditation, the cost of destroying public trust in our hospital. The room was silent as I displayed the numbers. But more importantly, I continued, let's talk about the costs we can't calculate. The cost of a preventable death. The cost to a family who loses a loved one because we decided saving money was more important than saving lives. The anonymous letters stopped after that. 3 weeks into our reform efforts, I received an unexpected visit from James Chen, a patient who had survived one of the post-operative infections during Harrison's tenure. I read about what happened in the papers, he said, sitting carefully in my office. About the compromised protocols, the covered-up incidents. Mr. Chen, I'm so sorry for. He held up a hand. I'm not here to complain. I'm here to help. I'm a lawyer, specializing in healthcare compliance. And I think my experience as a patient here gives me a unique perspective. By the end of our meeting, we had outlined a patient advocacy program, a direct channel for patients to report safety concerns without fear of being ignored or dismissed. The changes weren't easy, and they weren't quick. Every day brought new challenges, new resistance, new attempts to compromise or circumvent the safety protocols. But we had something Harrison never understood: the support of the people who actually did the work. Nurses, doctors, technicians, maintenance staff. They had all seen the consequences of compromised safety standards. They became our eyes and ears, reporting violations, suggesting improvements, maintaining the standards we'd fought to restore. 6 months after the medical board hearing, we received the official report on our progress. The hospital had not only met all requirements for maintaining accreditation, but had exceeded them in several areas. Patient safety metrics are above national averages, Catherine told me during her final inspection. Infection rates are down 60%. Equipment failure incidents have been virtually eliminated. And the costs? I asked, thinking of the board's initial resistance. She smiled. Actually decreased in the long run. Turns out preventing complications is cheaper than dealing with their consequences. Harrison's criminal trial began that winter. The evidence we gathered led to multiple charges of criminal negligence and fraud. As I testified about the systematic dismantling of safety protocols, I couldn't help but think about how differently things might have turned out if he'd succeeded in silencing me. 1 year after my termination, I stood in the same surgical wing where I first discovered the problems with the air handling system. The maintenance logs show regular checks, proper documentation, immediate response to any issues. Dr. Torres joined me on my rounds, now serving as both Chief of Surgery and Deputy Safety Director. Remember what Harrison used to say, she asked. Safety protocols are just bureaucratic obstacles. I nodded, checking the latest sterilization records. Now we know they're the foundation everything else is built on. The hospital had changed profoundly. Safety wasn't just a department or a set of protocols anymore. It was part of the culture, integrated into every decision, every procedure, every aspect of patient care. Harrison's efficient policies had saved the hospital $15 million over 6 months. Our safety protocols had saved something more valuable: trust. Trust from patients, from staff, from the community. Last week, I received a letter from a patient's family. Their mother had undergone high-risk surgery at Metropolitan General. The procedure had gone perfectly, with every safety protocol followed exactly as designed. "We chose your hospital," they wrote, "because we heard about your commitment to patient safety. Thank you for showing us what that really means." I pinned the letter to my office wall next to the termination notice Harrison had given me a year ago. Sometimes being too careful means being exactly what patients need. Metropolitan General became a model for other hospitals, proof that patient safety and financial stability aren't mutually exclusive. We developed training programs sharing our protocols and procedures with healthcare facilities across the country. The medical board used our case to strengthen safety regulations statewide, closing the loopholes Harrison had exploited. His trial led to new laws requiring greater transparency in hospital safety reporting. As for me, I still do my daily rounds, still check every protocol, still document everything. Some call it excessive caution. I call it doing my job. Because in healthcare, there's no such thing as being too careful when lives are at stake. Every safety check, every protocol, every documented incident is part of a system designed to protect the most vulnerable, patients who trust us with their lives. Harrison never understood that. He saw safety protocols as obstacles to efficiency, barriers to profit. What he didn't see was that they're actually the foundation of everything we do in healthcare. Without them, we're not just risking lawsuits or accreditation, we're risking the very thing we're sworn to protect: human life. Today, Metropolitan General stands as proof that doing the right thing isn't just morally correct, it's also good business. Our patient satisfaction scores are at record highs. Our complication rates are among the lowest in the state, and our costs, well, it turns out that preventing problems is a lot cheaper than dealing with their consequences. Sometimes I think about Harrison serving his sentence and probably still believing that I was just an obstacle to his vision of efficient healthcare. He never understood that true efficiency in healthcare isn't about cutting corners. It's about getting things right the first time, every time. Because in the end, the price of safety isn't measured in dollars and cents. It's measured in lives saved, complications prevented, and trust maintained. And that's a price worth paying every single time. The first time I suspected Victoria Sterling was a fraud, I was standing in front of a supposed lost Vermeer in her gallery's back room. Something about the brush strokes didn't quite match the master's technique, a detail most would miss. But after 15 years of restoration work and art authentication, these subtle signs were as clear to me as fingerprints. Magnificent, isn't it? Victoria's voice carried that particular tone of manufactured awe she reserved for potential investors, recently discovered in a private collection in Amsterdam. I kept my expression neutral, though my mind was racing. The painting was good, exceptional even, but it wasn't a Vermeer. The provenance documentation she'd shown me earlier had gaps, convenient ones that any serious collector would question. But Victoria had built her reputation on finding lost masterpieces, and questioning her expertise at Sterling Fine Arts was tantamount to career suicide in the San Francisco art scene. My name is Margaret Foster, and for the past decade, I've divided my time between teaching art history at Berkeley and running a small authentication consultancy. My specialty: identifying forgeries that fool even the most sophisticated collectors. It's not the kind of expertise that makes you popular at gallery openings, but it's earned me a reputation for absolute integrity in a world where that quality is rarer than a genuine Da Vinci. The brush technique in the window reflection, I said carefully, it's interesting. Victoria's perfectly maintained smile tightened slightly. At 45, she was the undisputed queen of the Bay Area art scene. Sterling Fine Arts had grown from a modest gallery to a powerhouse in just 5 years, largely due to her uncanny ability to source overlooked masterpieces from private European collections. The technique is consistent with Vermeer's middle period, she said dismissively. The provenance documents confirm it. I nodded, but my mind was already cataloging the inconsistencies. The pigments looked period appropriate, but there was something about the cracklier, the network of fine cracks in the paint, that felt too uniform, too deliberate. Natural aging creates random patterns. This was almost engineered. I'd love to have my team take a closer look, I offered. Pro bono, of course. A find like this deserves thorough documentation. That won't be necessary. Victoria's tone cooled considerably. We've already completed all required authentication procedures. Of course they had, and I was fairly certain I knew who had performed them. Marcus Bennett, a once respected authenticator whose recent certifications had raised eyebrows among serious scholars. But questioning his credentials would mean questioning Victoria's judgment, and by extension, the legitimacy of her entire collection. I should have left it alone. Should have nodded, smiled, and kept my suspicions to myself. But integrity has always been my weakness, or my strength, depending on how you look at it. The signature, I said, leaning closer to the canvas. The flourish on the V, it doesn't quite match his other works from that period. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Victoria stepped between me and the painting, her designer heels clicking sharply on the hardwood floor. "Margaret," she said, her voice dripping with condescension, "I know you mean well, but let's be clear. You're an academic. Teaching art history to undergrads is quite different from operating in the real art world. These pieces require discretion, understanding, a certain sophistication about how our world works." I understood perfectly. In the high-stakes world of fine art, questions about authenticity could sink million-dollar deals. Victoria wasn't just dismissing my expertise. She was warning me to keep quiet. "Of course," I said mildly. "I'm always eager to learn." Her smile returned, cold and professional. "Stick to teaching, dear. Leave the dealing to professionals." That should have been the end of it. I should have walked away, focused on my students, my small consultancy, my quiet life of academic integrity. But 2 weeks later, everything changed. It started with a phone call from an old friend in Amsterdam. Michael van der Meer had been my mentor during my postgraduate work in art restoration, and his word carried weight in European art circles. "Maggie," his Dutch accent was thicker than usual, suggesting agitation. "Have you seen Sterling's new acquisition, the supposed Vermeer?" "I have," I said carefully, closing my office door at Berkeley. "It's interesting." "It's impossible," Michael said flatly. "The provenance claims it came from the Backer collection, but I've personally cataloged every piece in that collection. This painting never existed there." My suspicions crystallized into certainty. "Are you sure?" "Absolutely. And there's more. I've been hearing whispers about other pieces from Sterling Fine Arts. Provenances that don't quite add up, documentation with convenient gaps." I sank into my chair, my mind racing. "Have you spoken to anyone else about this?" "Not yet. But Maggie, if what I suspect is true, this could be one of the largest art fraud schemes in decades." After hanging up, I sat in my darkening office, staring at the art history texts lining my walls. If Michael was right, and I knew he was, then Victoria Sterling wasn't just selling the occasional questionable piece. She was orchestrating a massive fraud, one that threatened the integrity of the entire art market. But proving it would be another matter entirely. Victoria had connections throughout the art world, and her gallery's reputation seemed unassailable. More importantly, she had the one thing that gave her absolute power in our world: trust. Collectors trusted her judgment, trusted her authentications, trusted her to turn their millions into priceless masterpieces. I spent the next week quietly gathering information. My position at Berkeley gave me access to databases of art sales and provenance records. Nights that should have been spent grading papers were devoted to tracing the histories of Victoria's most prominent acquisitions. A pattern emerged, subtle but undeniable. Over the past 5 years, Sterling Fine Arts had sourced an improbable number of discovered masterpieces, each with documentation just solid enough to satisfy wealthy collectors, but with convenient gaps that would make true verification impossible. But I needed more than suspicions and database records. I needed proof. Concrete, undeniable evidence that would stand up to the intense scrutiny any accusations would face. That's when I decided to set up my own gallery. It wasn't as impossible as it sounds. Years of consulting work had left me with substantial savings, and I owned a converted warehouse space in Oakland that I'd been using for restoration work. More importantly, I had something Victoria couldn't buy: genuine expertise and connections with legitimate collectors. Over 3 months, I transformed the warehouse into the Foster Gallery of Fine Arts. It wasn't glamorous like Sterling Fine Arts, but it had something more valuable: authenticity. Every piece I displayed came with impeccable, verifiable provenance. Every authentication was performed with rigorous documentation. And then I began acquiring my own collection, pieces that would make Victoria Sterling take notice. It started with a legitimate early Monet, purchased from a private collector in Paris who trusted my reputation. Then came a small but genuine Degas, its provenance traceable through 3 generations of a single family. Each acquisition was carefully documented, each authentication performed with multiple independent verifications. Victoria noticed, of course. She sent her assistant to my opening night, then began showing up at the same auctions where I bid. I could feel her watching, assessing, probably wondering how a mere academic had access to such pieces. The trap was baited. Now I just had to wait for her to take it. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. Through my European connections, I learned of a private collection coming to market in Vienna. Genuine pieces with rock-solid provenance, including an early Rembrandt sketch that would make any gallery owner salivate. I arranged to view the collection, making sure word of my interest reached Victoria's ears. The pieces were extraordinary, not just the Rembrandt, but several other Dutch masters, each with documentation that would stand up to any scrutiny. As I expected, Victoria appeared in Vienna 3 days after I returned to San Francisco. What she didn't know was that I'd already secured the collection through a private arrangement with the owner, an old friend who understood exactly what I was trying to accomplish. The next move was hers, and she didn't disappoint. "Margaret, darling." Her voice dripped honey as she swept into my gallery one Tuesday morning. "I've been meaning to stop by. Your little space is charming." I looked up from the catalog I was preparing, noting the calculated casualness of her $5,000 outfit. "Victoria, what a surprise." She wandered the gallery, making small talk about recent auctions and gallery openings. But I could see her eyes constantly returning to the photographs of the Vienna collection displayed on my desk. "I heard you were in Vienna recently," she said finally. "Interesting market there." "Very," I agreed. "Some remarkable pieces coming available." She picked up one of the photos, the Rembrandt sketch. "This is intriguing. You're pursuing it?" "Among others. The provenance is impeccable." Victoria set the photo down, adjusting her Cartier watch. "You know, Margaret, running a serious gallery requires more than just good taste. It requires capital, connections, experience, and handling major acquisitions." And there it was, the opening I'd been waiting for. "Are you suggesting something specific, Victoria?" She smiled, all business now. "A partnership of sorts. Sterling Fine Arts has the resources to handle acquisitions of this caliber. Your academic background could be valuable in our authentication process. And of course, you'd be well compensated." I let the silence stretch, pretending to consider it. "The Vienna collection would be part of this arrangement." "Naturally, along with your other recent acquisitions. Sterling Fine Arts would assume all financial responsibility, of course. Your role would be purely advisory." In other words, she wanted my legitimately sourced collection and my academic credentials to lend credibility to her operation. The pieces clicked into place. She wasn't just running a fraud scheme. She was building a facade of legitimacy to make her forgeries harder to detect. "I'd need time to consider it," I said carefully. "These pieces represent years of work." Of course, she stood, smoothing her silk blazer. "But don't take too long. Opportunities like this are rare in our world." The threat was subtle but clear. Join her or become her competition. In the art world, the latter rarely ended well. After she left, I sat in my gallery surrounded by genuine masterpieces, each representing years of careful study and honest dealing. Victoria thought she was springing a trap, but she didn't realize she was walking into one herself. That evening, I made 2 phone calls. The first was to Michael in Amsterdam, confirming that our network of authenticators was ready. The second was to my lawyer, ensuring all documentation of my collection's provenance was ironclad. The next morning, I called Victoria and accepted her offer. What followed was a whirlwind of contracts and negotiations. Victoria's lawyers were thorough, ensuring Sterling Fine Arts would have complete control over my collection and gallery operations. I signed everything without argument, watching as she systematically absorbed my legitimate acquisitions into her operation. Within a week, my carefully curated collection was moved to Sterling Fine Arts. Victoria wasted no time announcing a major exhibition, featuring the Vienna collection as its centerpiece. The art world buzzed with excitement. These were pieces that hadn't been seen publicly in generations. The opening was scheduled for the following month. Victoria spared no expense, inviting collectors, critics, and museum curators from around the world. My role was carefully scripted. I would be presented as Sterling Fine Arts' new academic consultant, lending my credentials to Victoria's already sterling reputation. The trap was set. All that remained was to spring it. The night before the opening, I sat in my empty gallery, looking at the bare walls where genuine masterpieces had hung. My phone buzzed. A message from Michael. Authentication team ready. Documentation complete. I smiled, thinking of Victoria preparing for her triumph, unaware that tomorrow would bring a very different kind of revelation. She'd built her empire on lies. Using my collection as a foundation of legitimacy, she needed to sell her forgeries. But she'd forgotten the first rule of art authentication. The truth always leaves a trace if you know where to look. Tomorrow, the art world would discover exactly who the real professionals were. The morning of the exhibition, I arrived at Sterling Fine Arts 2 hours before the scheduled opening. Victoria's gallery had been transformed into a showcase of opulence, track lighting perfectly positioned, champagne flutes gleaming, and security guards stationed at strategic points. The irony of protecting forged masterpieces with state-of-the-art security wasn't lost on me. Margaret. Victoria's voice carried across the gallery. I need you to review the catalog one last time. We can't have any academic inaccuracies. I accepted the glossy catalog, admiring the professional layout. My legitimate pieces were prominently featured, their impeccable provenances detailed with Victoria's typical thoroughness. But mixed among them were her discoveries, the questionable Vermeer, 3 suspicious Van Goghs, and several other pieces that had raised eyebrows in serious art circles. Everything looks perfect, I said, returning the catalog. The authentication documentation is particularly impressive. Victoria's smile flickered slightly. Was that uncertainty I detected? Yes, well, Marcus has been extremely thorough. Marcus Bennett. The key to Victoria's operation, though she didn't realize I knew exactly how key he was. Over the past month, while helping integrate my collection into Sterling Fine Arts, I'd been quietly building a complete picture of their fraud scheme. It was more sophisticated than I'd initially suspected. Victoria wasn't just dealing in forgeries. She was orchestrating a complex web of fake provenances, manipulated documentation, and carefully crafted stories about each piece's discovery. Marcus provided the technical validation, but the real genius was in how Victoria marketed the forgeries, mixing them with legitimate pieces like mine to create an aura of unquestionable authenticity. What she didn't know was that I'd been documenting everything. 3 weeks earlier, during the collection transfer, I'd accidentally left my laptop open while meeting with Victoria's authentication team. The specially configured device had captured every detail of their internal network, including encrypted communications with their forgers in Eastern Europe. Michael's tech experts had taken care of the rest. The Rembrandt sketch should be the centerpiece, Victoria was saying now, directing her staff to adjust the lighting. The provenance story is perfect, 3 generations in a Viennese private collection, only recently discovered during an estate evaluation. I watched her adjust the frame slightly, remembering how she'd reacted when I first shown her the piece. Her eyes had held that particular gleam I come to recognize. The look of someone seeing not art, but profit. The sketch's discovery story meshes perfectly with the other Dutch masters, she continued. It creates a compelling narrative about lost treasures emerging from old European collections. She was right about the narrative. The art market runs on stories as much as authenticity. Collectors don't just buy art, they buy the romance of discovery, the exclusivity of owning something thought lost to history. Victoria understood this better than anyone. It's what made her forgery scheme so brilliant and so dangerous. But she'd overlooked one crucial detail. The very legitimacy of my collection that made it so valuable to her scheme would also be her undoing. During the past month, I'd watched her operation from the inside, seeing how she and Marcus subtly altered documentation, created false histories, and built seemingly airtight provenances for their forgeries. More importantly, I'd seen how they used my legitimate pieces to lend credibility to their fakes. What they didn't realize was that I brought something else with me besides my collection. A network of the world's top authenticators, all quietly documenting every aspect of Sterling Fine Arts operation. Dr. Elise Dubois from the Louvre had posed as a potential buyer. spending hours examining Victoria's lost Vermeer while secretly documenting the technical inconsistencies in its composition. Professor Heinrich Weber from Berlin's Gemäldegalerie Gallery had reviewed the Van Goghs, his expertise in pigment analysis revealing the careful but detectable use of modern materials. But the real masterstroke had come from an unexpected source. 2 weeks ago, I'd received a call from Thomas Wright, a former student of mine who now worked in digital forensics. He'd found something fascinating in Sterling Fine Art's financial records, a pattern of payments to a small art restoration company in Prague, amounts far too large for legitimate restoration work. The payments correspond exactly with the dates of Victoria's major discoveries, Thomas had explained. And here's the interesting part, the company doesn't actually exist. It's a front for a known forgery operation. I'd added his findings to the growing file of evidence, each piece carefully documented and verified. The authentication reports were damning, but it was the financial trail that would make the case unassailable. Now, watching Victoria direct the final preparations for her grandest exhibition yet, I thought about the other preparations taking place behind the scenes. Michael had arrived from Amsterdam last night, bringing with him a team of experts equipped with the latest authentication technology. They were setting up in a nearby hotel, ready to move the moment the exhibition opened. Margaret? Victoria's voice pulled me from my thoughts. The collectors will be arriving soon. I need you to be prepared to discuss the academic significance of these pieces. Your educational background lends weight to their importance. I smiled, appreciating the irony. Of course, I prepared detailed notes on each piece's historical context. Excellent. She paused, studying me with those calculating eyes. You know, Margaret, I had my doubts about bringing you in. Academics can be so rigid in their thinking, but you've shown a remarkable ability to adapt to the realities of our business. The realities of our business. Such an elegant euphemism for fraud. I've learned a lot from you, Victoria, I said truthfully. She nodded, satisfied. The art world requires a certain flexibility. Not everything fits into neat academic categories. Sometimes the story of a piece is as important as its provenance. Speaking of stories, I said carefully, I've invited a few colleagues from Europe. Their perspective on the Dutch masters could be valuable. European academics? Victoria's smile tightened slightly. That wasn't necessary. Marcus has already completed all required authentications. Of course, I said smoothly, but their presence adds scholarly credibility to the exhibition. After all, these pieces represent significant art historical discoveries. She couldn't argue without revealing her concern. Instead, she nodded curtly and moved away to supervise the champagne arrangement. I checked my phone. A message from Michael. Team in position. All equipment calibrated. Documentation teams ready. The next few hours passed in a blur of final preparations. I watched Victoria working the room, her confidence growing as everything fell into place. The gallery looked perfect, each piece positioned to tell its carefully crafted story of discovery and exclusivity. At 6:45 p.m., 15 minutes before the opening, Victoria gathered her staff for final instructions. I stood at the back, observing as she detailed how each major piece should be presented to collectors. Remember, she concluded, these works represent some of the most significant discoveries in recent art history. Their provenances are impeccable, their authentications beyond question. Tonight, Sterling Fine Art cements its position as the premier source for important historical works. The staff dispersed to their positions. Victoria turned to me, her expression triumphant. Ready for your academic debut in the real art world? I met her gaze steadily. Absolutely. I think tonight will be quite educational for everyone. She nodded, missing the double meaning in my words. The first guests will be arriving soon. Remember, focus on the historical significance. Leave the provenance discussions to me. As she walked away, I sent a final text to Michael. Opening in 15 minutes. Begin authentication protocols. The trap was set. Victoria had spent a month integrating my legitimate collection into her operation, using my academic credentials to bolster her credibility. Now those same credentials would help expose the truth about her discoveries. I watched the security team do their final sweep, thinking about the other teams preparing to move. In less than an hour, some of the world's top authenticators would begin systematically documenting every flaw, every inconsistency, every piece of evidence that would bring down Sterling Fine Arts. Victoria had built her empire on beautiful lies, using my legitimate pieces as cover for her forgeries. But she'd forgotten something crucial about art. The truth isn't just in the documentation or the provenance. It's in the brushstrokes, the pigments, the thousand tiny details that no forger, no matter how skilled, can perfectly replicate. Through the gallery's windows, I could see cars beginning to arrive. Collectors, critics, museum curators, all eager to see Victoria's latest discoveries. They would see something remarkable tonight, but not quite what they expected. I straightened my jacket and checked my phone one last time. Everything was in place. In a few hours, the art world would learn the truth about Sterling Fine Art's magnificent collection. Victoria appeared beside me, practically glowing with anticipated triumph. "Shall we?" She gestured toward the door. I smiled, thinking of the authentication teams waiting nearby. "Yes," I said. "Let's show everyone exactly what we discovered." The exhibition opening unfolded like a perfectly choreographed performance. Victoria moved through the crowd with practiced grace, champagne in hand, weaving stories about each masterpiece that had collectors practically reaching for their checkbooks on the spot. "The brush technique is unmistakably Vermeer," she was telling a group of wide-eyed collectors. "The way he captured the light through the window, it's his signature style from the middle period." I checked my watch, 7:45 p.m. Michael's team would be starting their work now. The gallery hummed with excitement as San Francisco's elite art patrons mingled, sipping champagne and discussing the millions they were prepared to spend. I recognized several museum directors, including James Harrison from the De Young Museum, who was studying the questionable Vermeer with intense interest. Victoria's triumph seemed complete. She positioned my legitimate pieces strategically throughout the gallery, using their undeniable authenticity to lend credibility to her forgeries. The Rembrandt sketch, genuine and perfectly documented, drew visitors naturally toward the suspicious Dutch masters hanging nearby. At 8:15, right on schedule, Michael entered the gallery. He wasn't alone. Dr. Dubois from the Louvre and Professor Weber from Berlin flanked him, their expressions professionally neutral as they surveyed the room. Victoria's smile flickered slightly when she saw them. "Margaret," she hissed, appearing at my elbow, "who are these people?" "Distinguished colleagues," I said calmly. "They were very interested in your Dutch master's collection." Before she could respond, Michael approached, extending his hand. "Ms. Sterling, Michael van der Meer, Dutch National Art Archives. Your collection is fascinating." Victoria recovered quickly, but I caught the flash of panic in her eyes. "How wonderful to have European expertise here tonight, though I assure you, all pieces have been thoroughly authenticated." "Yes." Dr. Dubois joined in, her French accent precise. "By Marcus Bennett, I believe. A rather interesting choice for Dutch masters." The trap was closing. Victoria maintained her composure, but I could see her mind racing, calculating risks and possibilities. "Perhaps," Michael suggested, "we could discuss the technical details of the authentication process, particularly for the Vermeer." The provenance documentation mentioned the Backer collection. Victoria's face paled slightly. She knew as well as I did that Michael had personally cataloged that collection. "I'm afraid the detailed documentation is at our secure facility," she said smoothly, "but I'd be happy to arrange a private viewing." "No need," Dr. Dubois interrupted, removing a tablet from her bag. "We've already completed our preliminary analysis." The next hour was a masterpiece of professional demolition. As collectors watched in growing shock, the team of experts systematically exposed the truth about Victoria's prized discoveries. Dr. Dubois projected microscopic images of the Vermeer's paint layers, revealing pigments that didn't exist in the 17th century. Professor Weber demonstrated how the cracklier pattern had been artificially induced. Michael presented documentation proving the impossibility of the provenance stories Victoria had crafted. "This isn't just a single forgery," Michael explained to the stunned audience. "It's a systematic fraud operation using legitimate pieces to mask an extensive forgery network." Victoria stood frozen, her perfect composure cracking as her empire crumbled around her. When Thomas Wright arrived with the financial documentation linking Sterling Fine Arts to the Prague forgery operation, she finally broke. "You," she turned to me, rage replacing her usual polish. "You planned this. All of it." "No, Victoria," I said quietly. "You planned this the moment you decided to steal my collection and use it to legitimize your forgeries." The gallery erupted in chaos. Collectors who had spent millions on Victoria's discoveries demanded explanations. Museum directors who had authenticated pieces for their institutions pulled out phones, making urgent calls. Security guards looked uncertainly between Victoria and the exit. The legitimate pieces, James Harrison from the De Young asked, "How can we distinguish?" "Every piece from my collection," I said clearly, "has complete, verifiable documentation. I've prepared a detailed catalog." Victoria laughed suddenly, a harsh sound that cut through the commotion. "You self-righteous academic. You think exposing this changes anything? Art is about stories, about making people believe." I sold them what they wanted to believe. "No," I corrected her. "You sold them lies. Art is about truth, in every brush stroke, every pigment, every detail that true masters left behind. That's what you never understood." The police arrived at 9:30. Victoria maintained her dignity as they led her away. But Marcus Bennett broke immediately, confirming every detail of the operation. The Pride connection, the forged documentation, the elaborate scheme to mix forgeries with legitimate pieces, it was all exposed. In the aftermath, my phone didn't stop ringing. Museums worldwide wanted my authentication services. Collectors begged for help evaluating their purchases. The art world was in upheaval, and somehow I'd become its voice of integrity. 1 week after the exhibition, I sat in my restored gallery space in Oakland, surrounded by my legitimate collection, returned by court order from Sterling Fine Arts. Michael had flown back to Amsterdam, but not before helping me establish new authentication protocols that would become the industry standard. "You've changed things," he told me before leaving. The art world needed this wake-up call. Looking at my collection now, I thought about Victoria's words about stories and belief. She wasn't entirely wrong. Art does tell stories. But the true masterpieces, the ones that survive centuries, tell stories of authenticity, of human genius and creativity. The media called it the Sterling Scandal, but its impact went far beyond one fraudulent gallery. The incident sparked a revolution in art authentication, leading to stricter protocols and more transparent documentation requirements. My authentication consultancy became the gold standard, trusted by museums and collectors worldwide. Victoria faced multiple federal charges for fraud and money laundering. The trial made headlines, exposing the dark underbelly of the art world. Marcus Bennett turned state's evidence, revealing a network of forgery operations that reached across Europe. But the real victory wasn't about punishment or revenge. It was about protecting the integrity of art itself, the genuine masterpieces that human creativity has produced across centuries. 6 months later, I received an unexpected letter. It was from Victoria, writing from federal prison. "You were right," she wrote, "about all of it. I forgot that real art carries truth in every stroke. Perhaps that's why your collection always outshone my forgeries. Authenticity has a quality that can't be faked." I folded the letter and looked at the Rembrandt sketch hanging on my wall, the genuine one that had helped expose the fraud. In the master's confident lines, I could see the truth that Victoria had never understood. Real art doesn't need elaborate stories or false provenances. Its authenticity speaks through centuries, carrying the unmistakable mark of genuine human creativity. My gallery flourished, but not in the way Victoria's had. Instead of chasing profits through deception, I built a reputation for absolute integrity. Young artists and collectors sought my guidance, learning to recognize the difference between true masterpieces and beautiful lies. The art world changed too. The Sterling Scandal led to the creation of an international authentication database, making it harder for forgers to operate. Museums implemented stricter verification protocols, and collectors learned to value provenance over sensational discovery stories. Sometimes, late at night in my gallery, I think about Victoria and the choice she made to value profit over authenticity. In the end, her greatest forgery wasn't the fake Vermeer or the suspicious Van Goghs, it was the lie she told herself about what art really means. As for me, I returned to teaching at Berkeley, but with a new course added to my schedule: Authentication and Integrity in the Art World. My students learn not just about brushstrokes and pigments, but about the fundamental truth that Victoria never grasped. In art, as in life, authenticity is the only masterpiece that truly matters. The Rembrandt sketch still hangs in my gallery, a reminder of how truth prevails in its own quiet way. Its genuine brushstrokes tell a story no forger could ever replicate. A story of real creativity, true mastery, and the enduring power of artistic integrity. And that's a story worth more than all the forged masterpieces in the world.